talk, and I must apologise for this rather strange voice that you're hearing. The only reason you're hearing it is courtesy of Radio Mic. So I hope it's going to actually last for the next 40 minutes. And those of you who know me know that I don't normally sound remotely like this. It's very nice to be here with you, talking about something quite new, something called the MEC Interactive Worlds. And I wanted to ask, how many of you went to any of the Macmillan English Campus talks yesterday? Was anybody at them? Right, okay. Two more questions. How many of you teach learners under the age of 11? Kind of, ish, yes. And how many students between 11-ish and 18-ish? Right, okay, good, you're in the right place then. Because what we're talking about, what I'm going to talk about, is an idea that was born at IATEFL 2 years ago in Harrogate. Fiona Mackenzie, the publishing director of the Macmillan English Campus, and I were talking over breakfast, as one does at conferences, and Fiona had the idea of taking many of the strong features of Macmillan English Campus material, which is online material, giving a lot of very extended practice to students, taking that idea and seeing how it could be applied to learners in a classroom situation in schools as well as language institutes. And we started talking, and we talked about making online material available in a way that the teacher and the students could actually access in a way that didn't upset the teaching. Because one of the things I think anybody who teaches knows is that you're always fighting time. You're fighting time and tests and syllabuses and all sorts of things. And there are all these wonderful opportunities that technology now brings to people, and it seems to us a great shame if you can't tap into that. So we wanted to find a way of providing online material which was topic-based rather than language-driven. In other words, where the topic, the content, was the thing that gave the pointer to the language practice that would arise from the material, and which therefore in a school situation could link very clearly with school subjects like geography, science, history, art, music, and so on. Inevitably, and I think anybody who has been involved in writing or using reading materials knows this, inevitably, if you have content-rich material, it's going to be very vocabulary-rich. The vocabulary can be controlled to some extent, but the minute you start weeding it out and oversimplifying it, the material loses all its personality. So we wanted the material to be vocabulary rich, and we wanted it to be very, very flexible. Flexible for the teacher, flexible for the learners. We wanted to consider if it could be used on interactive whiteboards. Now remember, this is breakfast 2 years ago, and I don't know if you can think back to March, April 2006. Interactive whiteboards then, for me, were a rarity, a novelty. I'd never actually used one. I'd seen one, but I'd never used one. And the other thing we wanted to bear in mind was whether material could be linked into the appetite for CLIL materials, or whether CLIL, like so many things in English language teaching over the last few years, is something that would come and go again. Whether that was something that we should take account of. So that was the starting point. So having had this discussion with Fiona and other colleagues, we decided that we would try and structure our thoughts about this. We would stick with the idea that it grew out of MEC, that we wanted to produce content-based material, but it should be teaching material. In other words, that if the students use this, and I would like to say if the teachers use this, everybody would learn something. In other words, you're not using the material just to learn English. You're using English because the material happens to be in English, but you're learning and exploring other things. And I think that's where the idea of worlds came out. That worlds are there to be explored. And you go in with your own experience and you look for things and you come out again. And maybe you do things with the things that you discover there. The blended learning aspect was very, very important. Now I know blended learning, it's a bit like communicative language teaching. It means as many different things as there are different people in the room. But for me, blended learning is a mixture of the technology and the teacher. And for us, the teacher is very, very important. Because the teacher who knows her students, who can mediate between the material, can know what the students are, or guess what the students are going to find difficult, can make links, can see where using a bit of material can then take you off into another direction, and so on and so forth. So the thing is very flexible, but it is under the teacher's control. And the other thing we thought very important was that project work is such a good learning tool in most educational institutions. It's very important that the children feel that by using English, they can do things that become their own. So going to the web, getting information, seeing things there, is not a passive occupation. You go and collect material and ideas and thoughts and pictures, and then you bring them back to your reality in the classroom, your environment. And if you're a 10, 11, 12-year-old, you relate things like animals or climate change, not just to the greater world, but to your world. And you do that by doing projects. And projects can be very large or can be quite small. They can be a web quest, finding out something, or they can be drawing a picture, making a poster. It's not all computer-based. And the other important thing, I think, is the whole skills development idea, that it's important, obviously, for learners now to develop research skills, selection skills, use of material skills, because the danger is they just go to the web, do a cut and paste, and they produce something. Well, they haven't. The thought process is important. So we produced some pilot material last year, and over the summer, the European summer, it was piloted in Cultura Inglesa Sao Paulo, who were already using Macmillan English Campus in all their classes. They'd actually built it into their teaching programs. So they were very familiar with material to try and link to their main teaching. And it was also tried in some international house centres. And we gave them sample material to try out, and it was mostly tried out in media centres. In other words, by students working in pairs at a computer. I think it was only the Cultura Inglesa who used it on an interactive whiteboard. And the feedback was absolutely valuable. Because what came through from the feedback was that the teachers were actually quite surprised that the students were interested. We talked to the IH teachers before they did the pilot, or some of them, and I know the Cultura Inglesa ones quite well. And you know what it's like as a teacher when you're asked to look at something. You're sort of you're very polite and you say, interesting, and you reserve judgment. At least I do whenever I'm asked to try something out. And all the teachers we talked to were interesting, but yes. And the feedback we got was the students were really, really interested in this. They didn't want to stop. They wanted to go on and on and on using it. And that, to me, was a pretty good sign.